Well, good morning, everybody. How is everyone today? Good. Pretty good? So today, like Mrs. Baker said, I'm going to be talking to you about abortion, the hard cases. And so the goal for today, whatever you believe, whether you are completely pro-life, kind of pro-life, maybe you're completely pro-abortion, whenever you have any kind of set of beliefs, you have to be able to defend it inside and out. You have to know what you believe and know why you believe it. So today what we're going to do is we're going to cover some basic pro-abortion arguments that we hear for the hard cases. So a lot of times we'll hear people say things like, well, I'm pro-life, but if a mom is raped, that's not my place. I would never tell her what to do. Or I'm pro-life, but if the mom has a health issue, of course I would never say anything, I would never get in the way of that. Or I'm pro-life, but if there's something wrong with the baby, of course you can have an abortion. So those are the topics we're going to talk about today because of what I want the central theme of this to be and what I want you guys to take away from and what we're going to cover is that life is worth protecting at every stage for every reason, regardless of how he or she was created, the circumstances under which they were created, and what obstacles a mother or a baby might face. So that's the goal for today. And before we dive into that, we're going to start with defining our terms and differentiating. So the reason we start with defining and differentiating is because the pro-abortion side loves misinformation. They love to redefine. They love to say life begins at different stages. They love to redefine what a woman is. They really thrive on taking terms that we have held in scientific communities for a very long time, and then without any reason or without any notice, switching them up and saying that they mean something different. So whenever you enter into a conversation with somebody, whether it's about abortion or any kind of culture of life issue, you always want to start at the very beginning with defining your terms. So that's where we'll start today. So what is abortion? Abortion is the direct and intentional killing of a child in the womb. And of course, there's many different ways and timelines in which this can happen, but no matter if it is a pill abortion, if it is a surgical abortion, if it is a contraceptive abortion, the intent is always the same. The intent with abortion is always a direct and intentional killing of a child in the womb. So that's abortion. So let's define when life begins. Can anybody in here tell me, this is my only crowd participation question, can anybody tell me when life begins? Yes. Exactly. So life begins at the moment of creation or the moment of conception. So the moment that a sperm and an egg meet, this is actually really cool. This has been observed on different microscopes and you can look it up on YouTube. But there's actually a flash of light at the moment when an egg and a sperm meet, and that unique human life, that unique set of DNA is created for the first time. In all of existence, there has never been, there will never be that exact set of DNA ever again. So at that exact moment of creation, that baby's hair color, eye color, blood type, gender, my husband has a special type of anemia that was determined at the moment of his creation. All of those things are determined at that exact moment. How tall you're gonna be, what you might like, your dislikes, your genetic coding is all determined at that exact moment of creation. And it is so much information that it is enough genetic coding to fill 50 dictionaries. It's a lot of information and it will stay with you for the rest of your life. But at that exact moment of creation, all of that is determined and all of that is set into place. And so before we get into some of these popular hard cases or the things that we want to talk about today, we're going to talk about two of the most common justifications for abortion that I hear all the time in the pro-life movement. The first one is developmental stage. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. You probably see this on TikTok or Instagram with videos of, especially like Charlie Kirk videos of people debating. People often will use stages of development as justification for abortion, meaning, well, the baby is only 6 weeks along, baby couldn't survive outside the womb, so of course, it doesn't matter, we can have an abortion. Using the development argument, you could also justify murdering a 25-year-old because your brain does not finish developing until you're 26 years old. So by using the development argument, by saying, well, a baby's not viable outside the womb, that baby can't survive on its own, you could also say that a toddler or a 6-year-old can't survive on their own, because until you're probably about 9 years old, you really are not completely self-sufficient. And your parents might say that you're not self-sufficient right now either, because you still rely on your parents for a lot of different things. So using the development argument, saying that a baby isn't worth saving or protecting because they can't survive outside the womb, we can't use that argument, because you could also then justify killing somebody whose brain is not fully developed yet. So that's one of the first ones. That's a really popular one I hear. Second one is location. Because my baby is in my womb, some people think that he is worth less than you or me because we're standing in this room right now. So his location, for some reason, determines his worth. If we think about that, it's kind of silly. And if you could use the same logic for saying somebody in Kentucky or somebody in the Middle East isn't worth protecting because of their location. So location doesn't determine worth, and neither does development. So if we know these two things are true, we know when abortion, or what abortion is, we've defined that, the direct intentional killing of a child in the womb. We know when life begins, that moment of creation, that moment of conception. If we know these two things are true, then we can never advocate or allow for abortion. And this is what we call the no exceptions, no compromise side of the abortion movement. And this is probably the hardest side of the pro-life movement to be on, because it is the least popular, but it is the most freeing in that in my work at American Life League and as a no exceptions pro-life woman, I get to protect everyone. There's no parameters, there's no guardrails, there's no child that is off limits in my mind that deserves protection. So this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to go over some of these arguments now, and we'll start with one. We're going to go over 4. But the first one is actually an argument that I hear most often in the pro-life movement. It's not even the pro-abortion talking point. So this talking point is, we can't save everybody, so isn't it better to just save as many as we can? This is something I hear quite often in the pro-life movement. And so before we get into this, just a show of hands, how many of you guys play sports? It's St. Mike's, so it should be like every hand in the room. So for my basketball players and my football players, hopefully you will understand this best. We can't save everybody, so let's just save as many as we can mindset is a defensive mindset. And you guys know probably better than I do, a good defense can help win a game, but you cannot win a game on defense alone. If you leave your offense at home, you're not winning the game. You can certainly prevent some points from being put on the board, but you're never going to win the game with just defense. And so the whole goal of the pro-life movement is to make abortion completely unthinkable. It's to make it impossible, unattainable, unbelievable, completely off the table. If you ask anybody in the pro-life movement, that's the goal. So if that's our goal, to win 100%, we can't show up saying, well, I know we can't save everybody, so we're just going to save as many as we can, because we're just showing up with our defense at that point, and we need to show up on the offense. And so this argument, not only does it not make a lot of sense, but I can tell you, using facts and figures, that it does not work. Because this is an argument that we hear, a justification for a lot of laws that are being passed in our states right now. You'll hear them if you listen to the news, which I don't recommend that you do at your age, but if you listen to the news, you'll hear these framed as pro-life laws. But the thing about these laws is that they all hold exceptions, and they all seek to save some and not all. And so at American Life League, one of the things that we do is we collect a lot of data. Our research department is probably the biggest department we have, and our latest study showed that after the fall of Roe versus Wade, which was 3 years ago, so this was after our government found that there was not a constitutional right to abortion in our Constitution, a lot of people expected abortion rates to go down. And this is when we saw the implementation of a lot of laws that seek to save some people, but not all. And so since Roe versus Wade was overturned, the average number of abortions in America, and this is numbers that we collect from very liberal databases, so you can trust that they're accurate. 1.1 million children, on average, are aborted after Roe versus Wade was overturned. And not only is the number 1.1 million, but Planned Parenthood themselves have admitted that 70% of abortions are done with the abortion pill, which actually are not required by law to be tracked. So that 1.1 million number does not include the 70% that come from abortion pills. So to break that down, 1.1 million is 30% of how many abortions happen on average in our nation. Before Roe versus Wade, it was 850,000 a year. And I'm not saying that 850,000 is better, but it proves that these laws that we've implemented with the save some, not all mentality are not only not working, but are putting us in a better or a worse off position than we were before. So if we're gonna show up to win, we show up with offense, not a defensive mindset. And so now we'll jump into these hard cases. So we're gonna go over the big three. We're gonna go over rape and incest, mother's health, and fetal abnormalities. And we'll start with rape because that's always the hardest one. And I understand it is, being a compassionate person, it's a tough argument to have, and I want to preface this with, it's never an easy conversation, and especially if you are pro-life and you agree with me that even in cases of rape and incest, abortion should never be tolerated, it's never an easy conversation because rape is an incredibly violent and inhuman act. And so before we dive into this, I will preface this saying that the rapist in every single instance should be fully prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Whatever the fullest punishment is for rape, throw the book at that person. That is always how we should preface this, and I don't know that pro-lifers always do the best job at saying that right off the bat. So before we even dive into this, if there is somebody who has raped a victim, the rapist should always be fully prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Life in prison, 4 life sentences, whatever it is, the fullest extent. That's how we start this conversation. But I will follow that with this, and that is that violence does not erase violence. I'm not here to talk to you guys today in great detail about what exactly abortion is, and I also don't expect you guys to really know in great detail what abortion is. I worked in this for 7 years, and before I worked in the pro-life movement, I really didn't know, so I don't expect you guys to know. But I will tell you that abortion is an extremely violent act. You do not remove a child from the womb easily. The most common form of abortion is the abortion pill, which is a 2-pill regimen, so the name's kind of misleading. The first pill in the abortion pill starves the child to death, cutting off all nutrients to the baby. The second pill induces labor, and the mother, often alone, often in her bathroom, is forced to deliver a fully intact dead baby. I can't even begin to tell you how traumatizing that is. As somebody who's also pregnant, I can't even begin to tell you how hard that has to be for someone to do. That's the most common form of abortion. The second is surgical, where a woman will go into a Planned Parenthood facility and using a suction machine, they will tear her baby out of her womb piece by piece while that baby is fully alive in her womb. Abortion is an extremely violent act. Violence does not erase violence. A study was done a couple of years ago of about 1 million women. They surveyed about 1 million women. Of those 1 million women, about 160,000 of them had had abortions. Of the 160,000 women, they were at an 81% higher risk of severe mental health issues following their abortion than the other women were. After rape, 3/4 of survivors will develop some kind of severe PTSD or mental health issue. And that number is probably extremely low because most rapes go unreported. So 81% of abortion survivors, women who have had abortions, will have subsequent mental health issues. 75% of rape survivors and rape victims will have severe mental health issues. If we combine those two things together, how is that a path for healing? It's not, because violence does not erase violence. If you guys were here last year, you got to hear Pam Stencil talk. She was your pro-life speaker this time last year. Pam is a great advocate for life. I think she talked to you guys about chastity this time last year. But besides being a voice for life, Pam is also the inventor of what's called the baby box. This is really cool. We actually just had one installed in the Arlington Diocese just a couple months ago. But basically, it's a temperature-controlled box that they install in fire departments, hospitals, police stations, and a mom, if she gives birth and realizes, I'm not equipped to do this, I don't have the resources I thought I was gonna have, I don't have the community I thought I was gonna have, she can anonymously drop that baby off in a baby box. It locks and a little alarm goes off that alerts emergency personnel that a baby is in there, and then that baby will subsequently be adopted by a loving family. Pam's invention has saved thousands of babies, and it has really revolutionized what we call the safe haven laws that every state has. Pam was conceived in rape. Pam's mother was raped, chose life, and placed Pam for adoption. What I'm getting at with this is I want to impress upon you guys the impact that a single life can have. And not only the impact that a single life can have, but the absence that a single life can have too. Imagine if Pam's mother never chose life. Imagine if those thousands of babies that have been saved by the baby box invention, or the thousands of mothers that chose life after hearing Pam speak. Imagine if Pam wasn't here and those thousands of babies would not be saved because the baby box would not have been invented. One life has the potential to change our entire reality. Every time an abortion happens, it does not just affect the mother. There's a father involved. There are siblings involved, uncles, aunts, nieces, nephews, grandparents, friends, classmates. An abortion affects an entire generation. It does not happen in a vacuum. And so I use this because I want you guys to really think about the impact that a single life can have. And even though rape is extremely violent, an abortion does not erase the fact that a woman was raped. Years ago, during one of her visits to the United States, Mother Teresa was asked by an audience member at one of her talks, "In God's mercy, why has he not sent us a cure for cancer yet?" And Mother Teresa leaned into the microphone and said, "He did. You aborted him." One life has the potential to change an entire generation and generations beyond us. And so too, aborting one life has the potential to change generations and generations beyond us. Violence does not erase violence. So moving on to our next topic, mother's health. This is one that has become very popular in our post-Roe versus Wade world. And when Roe versus Wade was overturned, Planned Parenthood and many pro-abortion advocates were saying that abortion has to be legal because if a mother's health is endangered, she needs the option to abort her baby. And this is where, again, defining and differentiating becomes very important. Abortion, again, I'll remind you guys, the direct intentional killing of a child in the womb. A couple years ago, over 400 doctors, pediatricians, obstetricians, prenatal surgeons came together and signed what is called the Declaration Protecting the Life of the Mother. This declaration declares, redundant, but says basically that there is no reason to intentionally kill a child via abortion to save the life of a mother. When you're pregnant and you go in for your first appointment, that doctor has 2 patients, not 1. And you need to find a doctor who will fight for 2 patients, not 1. If a mother has some kind of medical event while she's pregnant that might risk her safety and the safety of the baby, deliver the baby early. We have incredible advancements in medical technology, and there is not one single medical event that requires killing a baby via abortion to save the life of a mother. And so this kind of ties in with our last topic, which is fetal abnormalities. And this one is close to my heart. I have a cousin with Down syndrome, and sitting in a room full of Catholics and Christians, I'm sure that you guys also know somebody who has some kind of, whether it's Down syndrome or some kind of fetal abnormality they were born with. I'm sure we can all relate, whether it's a family member or a friend of a family member or a cousin or something. We all know somebody like this. But the fetal abnormality clause, the biggest mistake this one makes is that it seeks to determine whose life is worth living and whose is not. And because somebody might be born with Down syndrome or somebody who might be born with some kind of fetal abnormality, people look at that life and say that that life is not the same quality as yours or mine because we don't have that. And so this excuse takes the fact that we have decided to determine what quality of life looks like and put that on somebody else. And so when you're about 12 weeks pregnant, Mrs. Baker and I can both attest to this, you're part of your weekly, every 4 weeks appointments is what they do called genetic screening. And so they offer this to you at 12 weeks. You can do a full panel blood test that shows you exactly what might be wrong with your baby. And when my husband and I went in for our 12-week appointment, our doctor looked at us and said, this is an option for you, but I will tell you that this test was solely created to give parents the option to abort. It was not created to give parents more time. It wasn't created to give parents a heads up. It wasn't created to make the nursery more comfortable. It was created solely to give parents the option to have an abortion. And speaking of this routine genetic screening, it's only 10 to 50% accurate. Imagine making a decision based on something that's only 10% accurate. Doctors can be wrong. Genetic screening can be wrong. And it's not up to us to determine whose quality of life is worth living and whose is not. And again, I said this with health of the mother, if you do say the genetic screening is right, the ultrasounds are right, the blood tests are right, and there is something wrong, your doctor is fighting for 2 patients, not 1. And again, we live in incredible times of medical advancement. A colleague of mine pioneered open heart surgery on preborn babies, where they will literally take the baby out of the womb, perform open heart surgery on the baby, put the baby back in, and the mom will carry to term and deliver a perfectly healthy baby. We need to find doctors who fight for 2 and not 1. And so with all of these exceptions, whether it's rape and incest, mother's health, fetal abnormalities, or even the let's save some and not all mentality, our biggest mistake is that we've tried to take the place of our Creator. We've tried to take the place of God and determine what life is worth living and which is not. And I think we forget this is not our place. It's not up to us to determine whose quality of life is worth living and whose is not. And this could be said for not just the preborn, but also for our nation's elderly, for people living with disabilities. And the most sobering statistic in all of this is that only roughly 20% of Americans agree with what I told you today. About 20% of Americans, on average, every year when they do this poll, believe that all life is worth protecting. That's a pretty sobering number. But it is on my shoulders, as much as it is on your shoulders, to change that. It's up to you guys to be that hope in that next generation. And I used to hate, when I was your age, I hated when people would say that to me because it puts a lot of pressure on us. But I think it puts pressure on us to really find our purpose. It puts pressure on us to find what God is calling us to and then to live it out. We can't just sneak by and keep our head down. It really forces us to grapple with what our calling is. And so my closing thoughts for you guys is this. If anything I said to you today was interesting, if you agreed with anything, if I presented an argument in a new way, or maybe you didn't agree with anything I said at all, do something about it. Learn, grow in your conviction, and get involved. I think that's what you guys are called to right now. Obviously, your calling at 15 or 16 is going to be very different than in 10 years when you're 30 or 35. But right now, you need to embrace a life-living virtue, embrace God's plan for your life, and ask for guidance on finding what that purpose is and living it. And maybe that purpose is donating a pack of diapers to the baby shelter over at St. Matthew's in Spotsylvania. Maybe it's babysitting for 2 hours at the marriage shelter. And maybe it's just saying a prayer for a mom who's considering abortion. But I want you guys to really think about your purpose and pray about it and find out what that is, because that is really how we change the culture.